Epidemiology is Epidemiology is a science that studies the disease occurrence and the health states in a human population. Veterinary epidemiology is the same thing, but studying non-human animals. Let's start with a look into the past, into the history of epidemiology. Hippocrates was the first epidemiologist, and during his time, that made him seem magical. So much so that he was actually rumoured to be directly descended from gods because of what he was doing. He aimed to understand disease using 3 stems or approaches. The first was medical. This is the use of clinical observations, paying attention to the environment that the case was in and the circumstances that seemingly led to it coming about. The second is demographic, looking at and comparing death rates, either by area or some other unifying factor. Finally, there was theoretical, which is a generous thing to call it, considering this was way before they, even discovered microorganisms. But nonetheless, it was an attempt to explain disease transmission. This is what we call early epidemiology, and it lasted up until the early 1800s, when it was replaced with classical epidemiology. At that point, the 3 stems were integrated into general practice, and so epidemiology as we stand it today was born. The study of disease at a population level was carried out in a more systemic way now. Epidemiologists would form hypotheses and then rigorously test them using observational and experimental data. This was around the time of the Industrial Revolution, when people started living more closely together and in conditions that created more and more diseases and more deadly diseases. During all this mess, a guy called William Farr tried and succeeded in making the demographic approach we were talking about earlier more effective. Not only more effective, but also easier. Basically, he set up a system to routinely record causes of death, but also other important statistics about a person's life, so that they can be compared later on. So for example, you can look at the causes of death most likely associated with people in a certain profession. So what diseases are doctors getting? Well, so now it's easier to track, which makes it easier to find out what is causing it. One man who benefited from this system, well, I suppose everybody's benefited from the system, but one man who used this system to his advantage, and now is very well known because of it, is John Snow, and not the one you're thinking of. This John Snow was investigating cholera outbreaks in London when he compared the frequency of the occurrence of cholera to water consumption. So basically, there's these 2 water companies supplying water in this area, and he's comparing the death rates to who is supplying these people the water. Looking at the water was quite unusual because at the time people generally thought that cholera was spread through the air, through the smoggy air, the foul, crappy air. But he checked these water companies anyway, and he found that it was only people who were getting water from this one company that were getting cholera, and that's because that water was contaminated. So, what was it, 50 years before anybody found out what caused cholera, this guy figured out how to stop cholera without even knowing what it was causing it. He just knew that it was coming from the water. He didn't know how that was happening, but he solved it anyway. And partly using this thing that William Farr created. So that's classical epidemiology. From the Second World War onwards, so up until now, the present day, epidemiology has significantly improved in 2 main ways. First of all, a development of more sophisticated methods. The things that we use to test and trace and everything. I mean, if I'd used the phrase track and trace, I think maybe we would have had a bit of doubt in the system, but that's politics, that's not science. The reason why this shit is going crap isn't because we haven't got the science, it's because of the politicians. But anyway, maybe I won't put that in there. But we developed and are developing more sophisticated methods, and also there's a greater application to a huge amount of diseases now. That means we can do what William Farr and Jon Snow did far more effectively, mostly thanks to the internet and computers. These things where William Farr was setting up these systems to check all these causes of death and stuff like that, that's all done automatically now. You go to the doctor about some condition and you write on, your census or whatever where you live, and that's recorded, and that's how people can track how diseases are spreading. These things where people know things about us is really actually good for us. It's making us safer from disease, for one thing. So let's look at some patterns of disease occurrence. How it spreads, where it spreads, all these things, whatever. So we've got two different types of pattern. We've got temporal and spatial patterns of occurrence, disease occurrence. Now, temporal is just basically means in relation to time. Spatial, a bit more obviously, in relation to space. So within a given period of time in this particular area is what we're talking about. That's what that means basically. So the temporal and spatial patterns of disease occurrence will provide initial information about the balance between the host, so like me for example, and the agent, which I don't have coronavirus, but as an example, it could be coronavirus, the actual virus itself, rather than the disease, COVID-19. I think the disease is COVID-19, isn't it? And then the virus is coronavirus, obviously. So that's another point to make. There's a difference between an agent, the thing that causes disease, and the disease itself. They're not necessarily the same thing, and we'll get back to that later as well. So there's a few different types of these occurrences. So one of these patterns is endemic occurrence, which is a usual or constant presence of a disease in a given population. You'll notice that although there is minor fluctuation in the numbers of cases, the prevalence is fairly consistent, and it all fluctuates around that average point. You can see that it's consistent. That's not going away anytime soon, because every time it goes down, it comes back up, and then down, and then back up, and it stays relatively flat. If you were to look at it on a bigger scale, or like really scale it down, it'll be. That's the thing. The size of your scale also makes a difference. Don't forget that. Epidemic recurrence describes a disease that is more prevalent than expected. So, in other words, it is above the endemic level, the level that our population normally lives with. It's a spike in the number of cases, if you will. So, sporadic occurrence describes, diseases that are sporadic. It's single cases or clusters of cases. No real rhyme or reason, just every now and then pops up. They do not follow a general trend. With the endemic cases, it's going all the way. With the epidemic, it's what it is. Everyone's got it all of a sudden, and everyone's not got it anymore. Either because they died or because they got it went away. Whatever. Sporadic is just. See, I didn't even do it then, because the point is, you can't know when it's going to happen. Whoop, they did. See, that was it. There we go. So we spoke about the disease occurrence, but what about the outbreaks themselves? Well, first of all, what is an outbreak? An outbreak is just a series of events clustered in time and space. We're talking about that temporal and spatial shit. But more specifically for epidemiologists, it's an excess of cases. More cases than you would expect. Usually they started by an infection of some sort or something like that, not always. So if you want to understand why an endemic disease is becoming an epidemic, for example, you need to understand the outbreak. So we're going to look at 3 examples of outbreak. This first one is continuous source outbreak. The source of the disease is exposed to the population for a long period of time. So it can include more than one incubation period. So in other words, say now my family with the population and my dog, which I would have classed as a part of my family, but actually no, Yanto does not count as part of the family. No, he does. But so for example, my dog then, even though he's a part of the family, so say he's the source of the disease. Now,
based on the smell coming out of that end, I'd say he is carrying disease.
My father gets it, and then I get it from my dog Yanto, and then my sister gets it from Yanto, and then my mother gets it from Yanto. So we've all been exposed to the same thing because So we've all been exposed to the source for this long period of time, and so we've all separately become infected. Now this one is a point source outbreak. The population is briefly exposed to a source, like, so for example, if we're all vegan, so it's not very likely we'd get food poisoning, but if we were to get food poisoning from a meal, you know, which you can't, I mean, it can happen, then that'd be a single point outbreak, because we all ate that one meal at the same time, and then it was done. It was a brief thing, but we all got sick from it. And that means that it's usually only one incubation period. Now this is a propagated outbreak. Disease spreads from animal to animal. And so you can see the point where the cases sort of started, and you can see that as more individuals become infected, the rate of spread becomes greater. So if you think about it now, one person with coronavirus can self-isolate and it'll go away and it's fine, but if they go and interact with other people, that will spread the coronavirus. So now say they give it to 2 people, that means 3 people have got the coronavirus. Say in that same, and then, say in 1 hour of mixing with other people, that one person can give COVID to 2 people. So in 1 hour, after 1 hour, 3 people will have COVID. But then each one of those people can give 2 new people COVID. So after 1 hour, there's 3 people with COVID. But after 2 hours, there are 9 people with COVID. I had to work that out then, quickly. But, so you can see the cases are getting higher and higher. Because each time more people get it, there's more people to give it to someone. And so that's quite a problem. That's quite, you know, this is why we need to isolate and stay away from each other. Because then if every single household in the world stayed in their house for a month, like just stayed in their house, nobody left apart from, I don't know, robots could deliver our food and all that shit. I know that's bad for jobs, but it means we don't die, you know? Anyway, I know that's like Amazon using drones, why can't Tesco's? And now a mixed epidemic is something we should talk about, and it can start with a continuous or a point source outbreak in which the disease can then be transmitted. No, wait a minute. So a mixed epidemic can start with a continuous or point source outbreak, but then once the individuals have become infected, they can then pass that disease on to other people. So it becomes a propagated outbreak, you know? The triad of epidemiological determinants. I nailed that. And so I'm not even going to do it again. All right, so disease is dependent on the relationship between the host, the agent, and the environment. And now, I know that makes it look like the environment is just the host and the agent together, but that is not the case. I just only have 2 hands. So you've got the host, the environment, and I don't know which one I haven't said, the agent. There we go, that's better. Each disease requires different interactions between these 3 determinants. Each disease needs specific environmental conditions, a specific agent, and usually a specific host. So like that disease that makes mice go crazy so that they get eaten by cats, they need an environment with, you know, well, I suppose mice, but that's host. They need a condition. They need certain. I don't know what environmental conditions they need, but they need certain environmental conditions, and then they need the specific agent, which is the thing that's causing the disease, the bacteria, and they need the specific host. So they need the mice to be eaten by the cat, and they need the cats. They can only reproduce inside the cat. So, you know, it's this delicate balance between all of the aspects that allow the disease to continue, and yeah, so understanding that relationship is an important way to figure out how to fix it. So like, because we can understand that now, technically, I know this is an extreme example and this isn't the sort of thing that we'd want to do, but for example, because we know that disease needs the mice, or we could kill all the mice so the cats don't get sick, or we could kill all the cats so the mice don't get sick. There's a problem with it causing stillbirths in lambs, so lambs being born dead, basically. And so if we didn't want that to be a problem anymore, we could just get rid of all the cats and get rid of all the well, actually, we wouldn't need to get rid of the mice as well. If we got rid of all the cats in the UK, then we wouldn't have that disease in the UK because it wouldn't be able to breed yet. So understanding that, as I said, understanding that balance is important to understanding how to with it, basically. Right, this leads on to the web of causation. So the web of causation is a tool used to describe when occurrence of the disease isn't only dependent on whether the agent is present. So that means you can be exposed to the agent but not get the disease because other conditions haven't been met. For example, environmental conditions. You're more likely to get the cold, or a cold, in the cold. The disease doesn't come from the cold. It's not the cold that's causing the disease. It's the cold that's allowing the agent to cause the disease, sort of thing. Or for example, the horse might need to be malnourished in order for the disease to be able to take hold. Maybe the immune response is good enough to fight it, so the immune response needs to be suppressed. But that's just that's the essence of it. We also want to talk about necessary versus sufficient cause. A necessary cause obviously has to be present for a disease to occur, whereas a sufficient cause is a set of minimal conditions and/or events needed to cause the disease. To better explain, get the point across of what necessary versus sufficient causes are, we'll just explain through an example. So first of all, we need to talk about causation. Put wonderfully by J. Pearl as the difficulty of translating into an equation the fact that the rooster's crow does not cause the sun to rise. We know that the rooster crows and then the sun rises. But that's just a correlation. That's a coincidence. The rooster's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence necessarily. Something doesn't have to be a coincidence to be a correlation. We know the rooster's crow isn't what's making the sun rise. The sun rising is what makes the rooster crow. So it's not a coincidence, but we can't assume the correlation. We can't assume causation from correlation. We know that the crow doesn't make the sun rise. The rotation of the earth makes the sun appear to rise. To combat the difficulty in determining causation, this guy Evan developed the unified concept of causation. It requires that the association between the hypothesized causal factor and the disease be statistically significant. That is to say that in order to allow for anomalies, fluctuations, inaccuracies in method, whatever, that 100% association isn't necessary. It needs to be very high to rule out that the association is a coincidence. This, however, does not prove causality. It is a necessary condition because it has to be significant statistically, but it's not sufficient. It doesn't meet the minimum standards for causality. That's, I think, the end of that, because I am done. That's about it. Yeah. We'll just throw that together, see how it comes out. And if it's good, it's good. If not, I'm going to try again anyway. This isn't going to be my last video. So, if that's useful, and you like the fact that I'm acting like a real YouTuber right now, smash that subscribe button, hit the like, comment down below. I don't know. I mean, if you want to say something, you comment but I don't actually know why they say to comment. Does the commenting make a money or something? If it does, then please do comment. If I get money for doing it, right, if you're thinking about doing something and there's a possibility that I will make money off of it, do it. Thank you. Hippocrates was the first. Hippocrates was the first. Let me try that one more time. Hippocrates was the first epidemiologist. I struggled to say that. Which during his time though, Hippocrates was the first Hippocrates was the first epidemiologist. Hippocrates was